I, like many others, and I'm sure you experienced this, when we would head over to a Wikipedia page before this 10 pounds of gold, and we'd see 52, 53-year-old Tim Storm as NWA champion, we'd think that's a little unconventional. How did that happen? What type of reactions did you get before 10 pounds of gold about your age as it relates to being a world champion?
Well, I think it really depends on, from whom and where that the reactions came. Prior to the change in ownership, I think for the most part I'm pretty well known in the South and the Southwest. I wrestle in basically an 8 or 10 state area pretty often and travel quite a bit. And those people know me, respect me, accept me. And really, to be honest with you, other than Wikipedia, which most people don't check, most people didn't know my age. And, for the most part, I shouldn't say, I'm going to say it, but I don't think I look 53. I try to stay in the best possible shape I can. And, just for whatever, genetics or whatever, I don't think that if somebody looks at me, they may say, yeah, he's in his 40s or whatever. But it wasn't until 10 pounds of gold that I opened those areas of my life that I've protected for so long up to public. And that just came about more from, William Patrick Corgan and Dave Lagana and I building just a trust, where I knew that I could trust them, and they told me what their direction was, which is we want the 10 pounds of gold to be real. We want to show people who you really are. We want to tell stories, but we want the stories based because we believe everybody has a good story. We believe you have a good story. There were really 3 areas of my private life, my personal life, that I have really guarded for 20-something years in wrestling, and one was my age. I didn't even start training until I was 30 or 31, and the other was, my job. I think most, at least old school wrestlers like myself, we didn't let, the term was we didn't let people behind the curtain.
Yeah.
We're professional wrestlers full time, and the kind of the ongoing joke is, of course we ride in a limo everywhere and we're millionaires. That's the persona that I think everybody wants. And then the other is I really was very guarded of my family. I didn't really feel like there was any benefit to letting people know who they were and what they were. And I've been very protective of those 3 things. But, as we built a relationship and trust, with Billy and Dave, I just opened those things up to them. And the initial reaction, I guess maybe even before the first episode, but as I was being introduced, by the NWA and the world was kind of seeing who I was from a different level, the first couple of weeks reactions were really all based around my age. And to be honest, some of it was pretty brutal. But as the 10 pounds of gold episode started to air, I think for the most part, the reaction was very positive. You're never going to get 100% of anything, one way or the other. But maybe 95, 97% after the first couple of episodes aired, it became more and more positive all the time. And really, it's been pretty amazing. People reaching out, and even now, I continue to get, people find a way to find, a private Facebook message, and obviously you can get a messenger even if you're not friends.
Yeah.
And they're still reaching out to me, and it's all very, very positive. So the last few months have been phenomenal. It's been a really good ride, and the production quality and the editing, the music, and the storytelling that Billy and Dave have shown with the 10 pounds of gold, it's been a pleasure to be a part of.
So initially last year, when you become NWA champion, how do you find out that you're getting that distinct honor?
You mean on the initial one? Well, it was a long process. I believe in the NWA, and I'm not the only one. James Beard was, I think his official term was, personnel director and talent, director for the old NWA. Really good friend of mine, Bruce Tharpe, president, and I carried the NWA North American title twice. One for an extended period of time, and lost it to Jack Dane when he had the national, and then the second time I carried it, lost a couple of months before winning the world, lost to Tyson Dean in Georgia, and had wrestled Jack's, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 times. I know once in Las Vegas, once in Mississippi, and I can't remember where the other one was. And, I guess at that point I was kind of recognized as, okay, he's got something. We like what he's got. If we make a change, he's an option. And, to Jack Dane's credit as a champion, he had beat me, I think, I want to say, I know he had beat me 3 times. One of those might have been a disqualification. But, you beat somebody 3 times, you don't necessarily have to, honor a 4th match or rematch.
Yeah.
And he was, he did that, and he did it at basically at my home base. At the time, it was NWA Texoma in Sherman, Texas, and he came to my hometown in front of my home crowd, and and I knew, I legitimately knew it was going to be my last shot at the title, and it was. Boy, I don't want to say it was one of the most emotional nights of my life, but I will say it's the most emotional wrestling night of my life.
I think that's one of the things that makes people connect with you, because like I said, I would check on Wikipedia and I would see 50-something-year-old NWA champion, and I would say that's odd, that maybe even a little suspicious. I watch 10 Pounds of Gold, and all of a sudden I see what it means to you. I see how important it is to you. And I'm like, wow, now I can connect to this guy. Now I can sympathize with this guy. You're a mountain of a man, and I can sympathize with you. That's a problem a lot of wrestlers have, is like, how do you sympathize with a guy who is built of muscle? Like, how is that an underdog? But like, I see your story on 10 Pounds of Gold, and I was like, that's a story I've never heard.
Well, and I guess Billy and Dave recognized that, but it's a thing where, like a lot of guys, whether they're my age or I would say probably 40s, 50s, maybe late 30s, grew up watching wrestling, and the wrestling that we grew up watching, especially for me, in the 70s and 80s, and then, even into the 90s a little bit, I was fortunate. I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I scheduled my Saturdays around wrestling. I got Memphis, USWA in the morning, with Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and all those guys. Every Saturday afternoon, I got Georgia Championship Wrestling, which was an NWA-based 4 Horsemen, Mr. Wrestling #2, Butch Reed, all those greats. And then in the evenings, I got World Class with the Von Erichs. So I, 3 times every Saturday, I was really watching wrestling. But the core of that for me built a love for the NWA, and that, to me, that was wrestling. National Wrestling Alliance. That just wasn't any better. And historically speaking, if you look at the champions, it's a who's who of professional wrestling. It's and I mean, go back to Luthez. But I think the official date is 1943, but there are some that say you can trace that back to 1908, and you go through, but you go, okay, well, Luthez. I was a huge Harley Race fan. You Terry Funk, Dory Funk, you just come down that list, and it's, and during my era of watching it, Ric Flair was the champion for a majority of that time with the 4 Horsemen, and I'm a big Arn Anderson fan. But watching that progress, and I some people have said, did you fulfill a dream? I never dreamed that high. When I got into wrestling, my goal was to have some matches and be a professional wrestler. I didn't say I want to set out to win the greatest title in the history of wrestling. So to the night that I won it, it was, I don't know. I guess maybe as I get older, I become more emotional. But I legitimately dropped to my knees and couldn't stop crying, because wrestlers don't cry. That's not part of wrestling. But I couldn't have stopped it if I wanted to, and I didn't want to. It was I knew at that moment that I had reached, for me, the top of wrestling for me, and it may not be the top for anybody else. But for me personally, I knew that, and that's where that term came from. I wasn't trying to come up with a cliche, but I knew I had reached my mountaintop of wrestling, and nobody knew at the time, including me, how long I'd be able to hold on to it. I didn't know if it was going to be a week. I saw somebody send me a thing the other day, with dates and all that kind of stuff, and said that I think they said I had held it for 414 days, but they had talked about Terry Von Erich and a couple other guys who had held it for 5 days. And at the time of winning it, I didn't know if it was going to be a week, a month, but I knew that they couldn't take my name off that list. And that was a moment just of pure joy, and now, 400 and whatever days later, it's still just as amazing and just as emotional, and still, I've listened to a lot of different things, and I'm not going to call the guy out, because everybody's got their opinion. I've listened to a wrestler who was basically saying he didn't agree with my approach as the champion, that you shouldn't be humble. you should say I am the champion, and nobody's going to be in it. But I'm just me, and I'm very transparent, and what you see is what you get. And some people like it, some people don't. And truthfully, I'm okay with either one of those because it's really who I am.
So when I spoke to Dave Lagana, he told me about some of the difficulties in transitioning essentially from a governing body to, as of right now, it's a championship that's active right now, possibly a promotion moving forward. And he told me that you were the only real person that he dealt with, and I don't want to say only, but one of the few real people that he dealt with in that situation, because there were a lot of people trying to take him and Billy for whatever they could. What were your initial impressions of Billy and Dave, and your reaction to them kind of gaining control of the NWA, something that you were the cornerstone of at that point?
Well, the irony of this is that I found out just like everybody else, which I didn't quite understand at the time. Now removed however many months later, it makes more sense. But, I guess during negotiations for the purchase and all those kind of things, they were in a non-disclosure agreement where there was no discussion going on. And I don't remember the date. I know that it was the date that a lot of guys were flying to Las Vegas for the CAC, Cauliflower Alley Club. And that's a big deal, to a lot of people every year. And I was not wrestling on it, so I wasn't going. And my phone, I'm a school teacher. I'm in class. And my phone just explodes with wrestlers and promoters and, friends and whoever saying, is it true? Is that right? It's, did the NWA sell? Is it true? Did Billy Corgan buy it? And I don't know any of the answers. So I'm sitting there as the world champion of an organization that, apparently has changed ownerships. So to answer your question, my approach on the whole thing, I approach life and I approach wrestling. I try to do things in a professional way. So the way I was looking at it was, it's out of my control about who the owner is and how they're going, to, go forward. Because I'm sure there was a lot of discussion, people asking me, don't you think that as they move forward, they're probably going to want to make a splash and probably get the world title on somebody who's well known? Do you think they want to put it on? I was going to ask you,
did you think that they were going to take it off of you immediately?
I thought that was obviously for me a possibility. Mm-hmm. And truthfully, while that would have been a little disappointing, I also would have done that without hesitation because, to me, this is really simple. I don't own that world title. I hold that world title as an honor, and I earned, I think I paid the price and I earned the ability to carry it. But as far as pure ownership, it's not mine. So if they come to me and say, hey, here's what we want you to do, or here's the plan, or here's who we're going with because we believe that's our future, in my opinion, I don't have a choice but to say, okay, it's yours. I get it. So, I never would have dreamed that the result would come out like it did. So I truthfully, I would have done whatever they wanted me to do because I believe that's the professional way to do it. And, that's how I try to approach life in general. But especially professional wrestling. I think the business deserves that. So, man, it's not a lot of guys that at 53 become better known than they ever have been in their 20-something year career. It's not many guys who get an opportunity to get a run like I have gotten over the last 3 or 4 months, at what potentially could be at the end of their career. So, what a great way to go. If this is it for me, and I don't know, I haven't made a decision yet. If this is it for me, what a great way to go out. And thank you, Billy and Dave, because they could have made another decision.
You have spoken about how maybe some promoters have offered to pay you to drop the title or do something with the title ahead of that situation. What goes through your mind when you're given that offer? Because as Dave said, the amount you were offered was probably more than what they were going to give you.
Oh, definitely. It was, and I'm not going to lie and say I didn't think about it. I didn't take it serious. But anytime money's part of the equation, I think anybody would be lying to say, no, I won't even think about it, because that would be a lie. When somebody offers me, I don't want to get into who and where and,
Sure.
How much, because I don't want to throw anybody on the bus, but, there were some guys who they were very tricky about it. I don't mean to me, because they were telling me what they want, but they were giving me a way to kind of opt out of the, you can pretend like you didn't know this was going to happen, but again, if I'm sincere, and I am, about approaching this stuff professionally, that couldn't even be a possibility. So again, I'm not going to lie. When money starts getting thrown around, it gets your attention, but it's still, no matter how much money, it doesn't make it the right thing to do. And if I do something like that, then everything that I have said that I am, and everything that I said that the NWA World's title means to me, it then becomes a lie. Because my goal, when I started making the NWA a priority before, under the old ownership, my goal was to try to do anything I could to make the NWA more relevant, because a lot of people say it wasn't relevant at all. Mm-hmm. So I mean that if I'm sincere about that, then those things weren't even an option. I'm going to do what's best for the NWA, for the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and for the future of, hopefully what is going to be a great future for, for the promotion. So, yeah, tempting, sure. I'm not a liar, but I'm also, it wasn't a legitimate even decision. It was easy, do the right thing.
Yeah, it's kind of the direction I'm working on a long form on, and I've talked to you and Dave Lagana, Dan Severn, and a couple other people about how 10 pounds of gold made me care about this again. Like, I was just like, okay, here we go again. And we've seen in the past, like Colt Cabana and Adam Pearce try to make people care again. And the rug kind of got pulled from underneath them. We often hear about politics with the fabled board of NWA, like having a board in 2016, 2017, and how different that is. Did you ever face any of those types of politics as the champion?
I know that they existed. I didn't deal with them personally. I have a very, and I'm not always right, by the way, but I have a very clear vision, a very clear definition in my head of what an NWA World's Champion should be, and how he should conduct business, and how he should deal with different, at the time, I don't know. It varied a lot over the years. Sometimes I think they were up to 50, and sometimes they were in the 20-something promotions, affiliates. But as I went to those different promotions, I went in really with one goal, and that was to represent the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship in the best way possible. And that's what I tried to do. All those political things that happened, fortunately for me, that was being handled by, mostly, I want to give James Beard the credit for that, because I know his job became to put out fires. And I know it was very frustrating for him at times, where the politics would pop up, and his job was to, he took it upon himself to try to put those fires out, to be the voice of reason. And, I didn't have to deal with a lot of those personally. Now, there were times when I could show up at a promotion, and, I kind of saw my role, and again, I want to be careful. I don't want to compare myself to anybody as far as wrestling ability or any of that. But I saw my role as world champion. I wanted to be more in the Ric Flair mold. For me, what that meant was, I want to come into a promotion. I want to wrestle whoever it is that they've booked me against, and I want that person. I want everybody in the building to believe that person had a legitimate shot at the NWA World Title. Now, when you come into those situations, and again, it's the advantage to having wrestled for this long. When you come into those situations, there's 2 or 3 things that they want to do, and you have to be really careful. I think everybody in the wrestling world knows what a dusty finish is. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a situation where you don't personally know and trust the people that are doing that, you're putting yourself, the NWA and the NWA World's title, in a precarious situation. Because there have been dusty finishes that didn't get turned.
Yes.
The bell has rung, and it was over. over, and all of a sudden you're not champion. So
Dan Severn in 2002, he told me about one, about how he didn't know that he was going to be champion, and then he was at the end of that match.
Yeah, and I mean, if I am representing the NWA and I am the one that they have chosen to be their world champion, I have to make sure I'm not putting myself in a situation where I let them down. And now, fortunately, of all the gifts that I have, because there are a lot of ways, a lot of areas that I fall short of things, but I'm a pretty decent communicator, and that means that if I get in a situation and a promoter says, "Here's what I want to do," I can usually say, "Well, I'm not." Instead of saying no, and then, I can say, "I'm not 100% comfortable with that. Can we do this?" and offer an alternative, and kind of walk through it with them. And so, there's a lot of ways to handle that, but from a political standpoint, I dealt with that more than I did the board of directors and all those kind of things. And really the last few, maybe most of the time that Bruce Tharpe owned it, there was not so much a board of directors as much as there was, one or two guys that had input and that trust, that had the ear and trusted, and they made the decisions. So it wasn't like it used to be with, 18 affiliates or, world territories who were all vying for their guy to be the champion. It didn't really work that way over the last 5 or 6 years, so I didn't have to deal with the political side that much.
How was your relationship with Bruce Tharpe when he was in control, and do you maintain a relationship with him now?
We got along great. All of us have strong points and weak points, and I'm sure Bruce did too. But I know that, where some people question some of Bruce's decision making, he loved the NWA, and when he bought the NWA, it wasn't a selfish thing. He was trying to make it better. There will be those that argue one way or another whether or not he was successful. But over a period of time, and it's just like anything. It's like, it's any other job. If you go in and you do a job at position one and prove yourself, you get you have an opportunity at a promotion, and they trust you with something else, and you prove you can do that, and you get another promotion, and that's kind of the way it worked. Bruce and I had a good relationship. After the sale, I think he has intentionally laid low, where I think he wanted, there were a lot of affiliates, and I won't say all, but many affiliates who were really unhappy that the NWA sold, especially once the decision was made not to really have affiliates anymore. And I think that put Bruce, because of, and I hate to speak for him because he's, he hasn't told me this personally, but my guess would be that because of the non-disclosure and the fact that he couldn't tell anybody, it put him in a weird spot, that all the affiliates who basically were coming into Las Vegas thinking that they were going to be having a meeting about the future of the NWA found out all at the same time that it had been sold and nobody knew what was going to happen. So I think he has kind of intentionally laid low, and I don't believe in any way that he's completely done with the wrestling. But we don't talk much, but when we do, it's on very good terms. And I would say we still have a good relationship. We just not one of those things where we talk a lot.
How does the NWA not having affiliates affect you personally? Because I'm sure that I know that with 10 Pounds of Gold, your booking schedule has changed a little bit, popping up at CZW and House of Hardcore and things like that. But now without those NWA affiliates and stuff, how does that affect you?
Well, let me address it as from a champion standpoint.
Sure.
The original agreement for an NWA affiliate or a franchise is that they were supposed to use the champion once a year, and I think and I hope I'm right, but I think it was, and 2 other champions anytime during the year. So you basically had 12 months to fulfill 3 bookings, and that the idea there is that you're getting to see what the NWA considers the best of their talent, but also it helps the best of their talent by guaranteeing those bookings. And many of the affiliates did that, many of them didn't do that. Now, how it affects me personally, it changed. There were affiliates in I don't know how many states, but there were quite a few states, and it wasn't just in the South or the Southwest. It was, there were. I know at one point there was one in Australia, and there was some discussion about England. Anyway, there was a lot of different places. But the way it's changed for me now is instead of getting, well, and again, it's not me now, but it turned from, okay, I can drive if I'm willing to invest in it, I can drive from Texas to Dyersburg, Tennessee, or and that's 7 hours, or I can drive from here to Amarillo, Texas, or, there's most of those places, a lot of them were drivable. Many of them, you took flights, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're doing once a month in LA, going to New York and Philadelphia, that it's a different form of travel. But maybe it's a better, I had a blast. I enjoyed every bit of that. I won't say I'm still a fan, but a lot of those guys I don't get to see much. I've popping up at the House of Hardcore and Tommy Dreamer calling you to the ring. He and I have tagged together. We've wrestled against each other, but over the last 10 years, that's probably only been 4 or 5 times. So, it's fun to show up at those places, especially when you're not necessarily expected, and pop up and see guys you don't get to see very often and represent what still has prestige in the business. And I know a lot of people say, well, and this is something I've run into for a long time. The NWA, that people would say the NWA is not what it used to be. Well, and my argument was always, I don't think wrestling, especially if you're looking at the old history of wrestling's not what it used to be. You can't lose, go through the name of those 80s and 90s guys that represented professional wrestling, and they were some of the best in the history of the business. You can't take out that generation of guys and say wrestling is what it used to be. So I wouldn't disagree with that. But within the business itself, you go to a promotion somewhere, and I've told this story before, and I'm not going to use his name, but I was at a pretty big show, getting dressed, and I'm lacing my boots up, and I've got the world title sitting on my bag, and a very well-known wrestler walked by, and he saw it, and he just froze, and he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he goes, "Is that really it?" And I went, "It is." He goes, "Can I touch it? Can I hold it?" And so within the business, the love and the respect for the prestige of the NWA World's title is there. It hasn't. Billy and Dave are now bringing it back to the forefront, and the amount of traction that we've gotten over the last 3 months is fantastic, and there's way more to come. It's just, like I said, it's just such a blessing. So great to be a part of it.
So as we wrap up, I want your thoughts on how your series of matches with Nick Aldis went, from a performance standpoint.
Okay. And this one, I have 2 opinions of the matches, because first off, in a promo, Nick made the comment about that there are different levels of wrestling, and to be honest with myself, and I have told Mr. Aldis this, I had no idea what he meant, because the truth is, and I could get tortured for this, the truth is, I really thought I could wrestle with anybody in the world, and I can, but I realized when I got in the ring with him the first time what he meant by different levels, and from a technical standpoint, even from a knowledgeable standpoint, he was on a whole different level. Now I've told somebody that, and they said, well, yes, but in my world, I had not gotten the opportunity to be in the ring with that quality. And here's the weird thing. I really have been in the ring with some of the greatest wrestlers in the world. And I mean, I'm not a name dropper, but let me use one. I've wrestled AJ Styles a dozen times, and he's a good friend, and we have great matches. But when I got in there with Nick, and I don't know if it was a point where, maybe because I don't know what the situation was. Coming out of the first match, I was a little disappointed in myself. Now I went back and watched it, and I watched it when it, after it happened, and didn't even want to finish the match, and watching it. But I went back later and watched it and went, oh, okay. Well, I was too hard on myself. I still would do a lot of things differently, but it wasn't near as bad as it was in my mind. This last match with Nick Aldis was completely different in makeup and content and the story we told, because I believe wrestling is telling stories, and much shorter, but I was very pleased with the story we told in both matches. I came away from the first one as a challenge, saying, okay, well, these are some things I need to improve on. He's incredibly talented. He's a big guy. He's strong. He's technically more than proficient. He's phenomenal. I do not pride myself on being a technical wrestler. I am way more comfortable punching somebody in the mouth than I am, trying to work a technical match. And I know that that's my strength. In that first match, I tried to do things outside of my norm and outside of things that I'm comfortable with. And I think that kind of backfired on me a little bit. But again, it's a learning experience. And I would tell anybody, no matter how long they've been wrestling, that if you ever get to the point in the business where you think you know everything, you probably need to get out, because you become complacent and you're never going to know everything. So I
heard an interview with Jerry Lynn recently. He said the main reason he was upset he couldn't keep wrestling is because he still had so much to learn.
Yeah. When I trained, however many years ago, 20 whatever years ago, the guy that trained me said it's going to take you 7 years to even understand what you're doing and the basics. And I remember wrestling for 2 years thinking, oh, he's full of it. I know, I got it now. I've got it. And then I remember like 2 years later, so at the 4-year mark, looking back going, wow, at 2 years, I knew nothing. And now I've got it. and the last 20-something years have just been a constant reevaluation and trying to figure out, okay, you never stop learning. You should never stop improving. And while my body is breaking down, physically, I can't do things that I could have done even 3 or 4 years ago. Mentally, I think my game is stronger than ever, and my cardio, it never lets me down. I'm always in great shape. My strength is still there. It's just, injuries don't heal as quickly, and sometimes they feel like never when you get older. And those are the things that I have to deal with. But I hope that I'm smart enough and honest enough that I ever get to that point where it's affecting my matches so much that that I need to step away. I hope I know that it's time to do that, and that's part of the evaluation process. That losing to Nick Aldis, that's part of the evaluation process I'm in now. I'm looking at the situation. I'm looking at myself. I'm evaluating injuries and saying, okay, is this something that's going to heal or is it not? And I haven't made a decision yet, but part of the advantage of being older and wiser is you learn not to make decisions in an emotional state, because usually an emotional decision is usually the wrong decision.
Oh, we see that all the time. We cover a lot of MMA at Fightful, and I can't count the number of guys this year alone who have retired after losing matches, and then 3 weeks later you see them accepting fights and they're booked. Right.
Well, and I'm not knocking anybody out there, but I don't ever want to be, and some of the greatest in the business have done this, but I never want to be the guy that retires and comes back and retires and comes back.
Sure.
If I make that decision, I want to know it's the right decision. And the biggest problem with that is my passion for wrestling. My passion for the wrestling business is so strong that I can't imagine stepping away from something and thinking I'm never going to have the opportunity to do what I love to do again after 20-something years. So that's a huge decision for me. It's not something I'm going to take lightly. And I'll be honest, I don't want to stop wrestling, but I also have to be honest enough and try to make a decision on it if it's time to stop or not. And again, I want to be really clear. I haven't made a decision one way or the other. So I'm not hinting that I'm done. I'm not hinting that I'm not done. I don't know yet.
I found this out that you once teamed up with Ahmed Johnson. Please walk me through that experience.
We did. I love Tony. I thought, great guy. We did a series of matches at PCW. And it started out where Ahmed came in. We had a faction called the Dark Circle, and our leader was a guy named Shadow, who became Dallas, who then became, I'm missing one in there, but then became Lance Archer, and now his real name is Lance Hoyt. Who's very well known with New Japan, and he and Harry Smith, the tag team part. But anyway, that was our faction, and Ahmed came in and basically just let us destroy him for about 6 weeks. Week in, week out, we were killing him. And on the big payoff night, he ran a 3-against-1. It was everybody but Lance. And he came in, he walked in with his WrestleMania jacket on, and he goes, all right, boys, here's what's going to happen. I've been putting you over for 6 weeks. Tonight I get mine back. So he took all 3 of us, stacked us on a table, climbed to the top rope, and he said he was going to hit an elbow. And I remember laying there with two guys on top of me looking up, and my tag team partner was right on top of me, and I whispered in his ear, "That's not an elbow." And he hit the most nasty 340-pound splash I've ever taken. And but we went on and did some different angles, and he and I ended up running a tag match against, I think it was a couple of guys called the Cowboys of Hell, which was Scott Putski and Cedric Crane, who were great workers, great body guys, real physical. But yeah, we got along great. And, I know some guys out there may have negative Ahmed stories, but I have none of them.
I loved watching him as a kid. Yeah. I loved watching him as a kid. I
think he was one of the, what was he, I remember him being called a workhorse champion. It was one of the guy who seemed to defend the title on every show.
Yeah. I remember watching him slam Yokozuna as a child, and I was always enamored. Always thought that was so cool.
Yep.
He did it so effortlessly.